I never expected to see a huddle of neighbors glaring at me from across the water, nor did I think my routine weekend fishing trip could trigger such a fierce battle with the homeowners association. Yet here I am, a grown man gripping my boat's steering wheel in utter disbelief, while Karen, our self-proclaimed HOA president, stands at the dock with her arms folded. She gazes at me as if she's ready to declare war. She insists I have no right to moor my boat on this stretch of shoreline. She claims she controls the entire lake access because it keeps the community safe. But there's something about her eyes that unsettles me. It isn't safety that interests her, it's the power, the potential profit, and the hush-hush deals she's orchestrating behind the scenes. I can't prove it yet, I only sense it. And that's precisely why I decide, right then and there, to fight back. I grew up learning that community spirit meant generosity. People helped each other out. They lent garden tools or invited neighbors over for barbecues. I moved here with that same optimistic outlook, expecting a laid-back lakeside neighborhood. Instead, I found an HOA with an insatiable appetite for control. The moment I arrived, they started emailing me about standards. Everything from the paint color on my shutters to the height of my hedges was scrutinized. But I didn't mind minimal guidelines. I even agreed to keep my yard neat so no one would complain about property values. Then Karen turned her gaze toward my boat dock. That's when I realized this wasn't just about following a few architectural guidelines. It was about tearing down personal freedoms for her own hidden gain. She started showing up in my driveway to discuss the association's concerns. She'd greet me with a sugary, condescending smile, explaining that my boat dock was non-compliant and must be removed, replaced, or possibly turned into something else. I asked for specifics, but all she provided was a short wave of her hand and a vague statement that the HOA had bigger plans for the community. I had no idea what those plans entailed. I only knew they spelled trouble for me. The day she officially notified me that my access to the boat ramp would be restricted was the day I decided to investigate deeper. I needed to know why she was so intent on controlling the lake. I contacted the county records office and discovered that much of the shoreline around this lake was originally public. Our neighborhood had an association that managed the communal areas, but as far as I could tell, there was a question about how many sections truly belonged to the HOA and how many remained under county jurisdiction. Karen, however, seemed certain she owned it all. She insisted that if I continued using the water at that point, I'd receive fines or a legal summons for trespassing. It sounded absurd, this was a lake after all, but I'd seen HOAs do equally preposterous things. I refused to remove my boat, and she retaliated by escalating the matter at the monthly HOA meeting. That event changed everything. Let me explain how the HOA around here operates. It's more like a private club run by Karen's hand-picked board. She's been president for nearly 7 years, rarely challenged. People either don't care or fear retribution. She has a knack for intimidating residents, threatening to fine them over nonsense or withholding amenity passes. I witnessed it firsthand. A neighbor named George had a small greenhouse in his backyard, and Karen claimed it violated community uniformity. He was forced to dismantle it under threat of daily penalties. It was humiliating for him, but it taught me that Karen would push any envelope if it suited her interests. At that crucial monthly meeting, which took place in the modest neighborhood clubhouse, I sat in the back row, trying to make sense of the archaic bylaws. My presence caused a mild stir. I was new to this level of confrontation, but determined to stand up for my rights. As soon as the meeting started, Karen hopped up front. She banged a small gavel on the fold-out table, commanding attention. Then she announced that boat ramp usage would be temporarily suspended due to safety hazards. Several people gasped, others wore confused expressions. I raised my hand, but Karen ignored me for a full minute. Eventually, she flashed her plastic grin in my direction, saying, "Yes, sir? We do love input from all our residents." I told her calmly that restricting my boat access made little sense. The ramp had been operational for years without issue. She pretended to sympathize, but insisted the HOA had discovered cracks along the shoreline that could pose a danger. I pressed her for details. Who performed the inspection, and were there official records? She grew irritated. She mumbled something about a private study paid for by the HOA, which was not publicly available. I knew something was off. If it were a genuine hazard, they'd have a formal inspection by a county engineer. Instead, Karen had some secret consultant confirm her narrative. The meeting moved on, and I was left boiling with frustration. A neighbor named Lucy approached me afterward. She whispered that Karen had apparently been in talks with a private real estate developer. Rumor had it they intended to purchase property around the lake, build luxurious lakeside villas, then charge substantial lakefront usage fees. Lucy suspected that the shore's reclassification as HOA only would spike the land value. Karen presumably stood to make a fortune from development deals. If so, she needed to lock down the entire lakeside and remove anyone who wouldn't comply. Hearing that was a jolt. It also explained the relentless pressure on me to give up my dock. I refused to kneel before underhanded ambitions. But where would I start? I decided to consult an old friend who specialized in local property law. His name is Edwin Foster. We grew up together, though we'd lost touch after college. Edwin had always been the type who thrived on research, loved digging through archives, and got a kick out of exposing shady dealings. He was the perfect ally. When I called him up, I practically poured my entire predicament into the phone. There was a pause, then he said, "Tell me everything. I'll do a bit of legal sleuthing." He sounded intrigued, not just by my story, but by the odor of corruption that seemed to swirl around Karen's plans. Meanwhile, the HOA ramped up their efforts to punish me. A few days later, I noticed a bright orange sign hammered into the ground by the public slipway. Pillage HOA property, no trespassing. I knew it was questionable to classify that area as private. However, Karen had managed to erect that sign without going through county channels. She also sent me a notice stating I was in violation of community guidelines by disregarding newly established boat safety measures. If I didn't comply, I'd face a $100 0 cents a day penalty. That sum would devastate my finances within a few weeks. My blood pressure rose, but so did my resolve. This was the moment I realized we were headed for a serious clash. I emailed the county inspector's office to clarify who truly owned that boat ramp. Days passed with no official response. I visited them in person, only to find the clerk unhelpful. She said there was confusion over the actual property lines. The original developer from decades ago had filed a series of complicated plats. The city officials needed more time to cross-reference those records. I felt stonewalled. Perhaps Karen was pulling strings, or maybe it was simple bureaucracy. Either way, I'd have to wait for them to sort it out. While waiting, I focused on my typical daily life. I worked as a remote graphic designer, a job that offered flexible hours. I'd often finish assignments in the morning, then head out to fish in the afternoon. One sunny afternoon, as I was carrying my fishing rods and gear down toward the dock, I saw Karen standing there, tapping her foot. She pointed to the sign behind her and demanded that I turn around. She said I was trespassing on HOA land. I reminded her I had a deed that included riparian rights, meaning I was legally allowed to access to the water behind my lot. She seemed furious. She snapped that my deed was outdated. She threatened to call the police if I took another step. I asked her politely to show me official documentation. Instead, she pulled out her phone. The menacing look in her eyes told me she might actually dial 911 just to escalate the standoff. That's when I saw a figure stepping off a small pontoon boat. My neighbor Chris. He'd lived here longer than I had and was usually laid back. He walked toward us with an uneasy smile. He tried to diffuse the tension by greeting Karen politely. "Lovely afternoon, isn't it?" Karen huffed and insisted Chris should also leave the dock area. He gave me a sympathetic shrug as if to say, "I'm sorry, man, she's gone off the rails." I didn't want a public scene, so I turned around and retreated. Later that evening, Chris came by my house. He confided that Karen might be engaged in an underhanded arrangement with a real estate investor from out of town. Apparently, the investor wanted exclusive control of the boat ramps and docks to create a for-profit marina. If that was true, then my refusal to relinquish my dock threatened Karen's potential windfall. I shared this rumor with Edwin, who had begun researching the HOA's financial dealings. He discovered that within the past 6 months, the association's budget showed unusual expenses, labeled consultant fees. The amounts were hefty, tens of thousands of dollars, but none of the line items had a named payee or any detailed explanation. Edwin suspected these fees might relate to the hush-hush developer. He told me to keep documenting every threat or sign Karen posted. If it goes to court, you'll need hard evidence, he cautioned. I started snapping photos of her legal signage, her arrogant posturing, and any letters she left in my mailbox. I also printed out every email exchange. Things escalated further at the next community meeting. Word had spread about my dispute with the HOA, so quite a few residents turned up. I guess they wanted to see what else Karen had up her sleeve. She, as usual, called the meeting to order in her condescending tone. Then she dropped a bombshell. The HOA was imposing a new lake usage fee on all boat owners to cover maintenance and safety improvement. Everyone in the room started murmuring. The fee was not trivial, $200, 0 cents per month, plus $10, 0 cents each time you launched your boat. That might not seem catastrophic at first glance, but over a year, it added up to a massive amount. Considering the lake had always been community accessible and originally public, this move felt predatory. I asked Karen how the money would be allocated. She claimed it would be used for infrastructure improvements, such as shoreline repair. But Lucy, who'd been quietly observing, stated she'd discovered no actual repairs scheduled anywhere in the official HOA records. Karen brushed that off, repeating some line about an upcoming project that needed confidentiality. People demanded answers, but she banged her gavel and ended the discussion. I saw fear in the eyes of many neighbors. They didn't want confrontation or fines, so they typically caved to Karen's demands. I, on the other hand, was becoming more determined. At that point, Karen singled me out. She said, "And regarding Mr. Parker's repeated defiance over his boat access, we'll be filing a lien on his property if he continues to ignore these lawful fees." A hush fell. Then a few onlookers gave me sympathetic looks, while others simply stared, unsure of how to respond. I refused to let her intimidate me, but I had to be methodical. Right after the meeting, I approached an elderly board member named Ruth, who seemed torn during the proceedings. She admitted Karen rarely listened to the board at all. Karen made unilateral decisions and rubber-stamped them, often persuading or strong-arming other members to sign off. Ruth had tried to speak up in the past, but she feared losing her home to fines as she was on a fixed income. This was a turning point for me. I realized how many people Karen had coerced or silenced. If I wanted to protect my boat access and my property, I'd have to confront the root cause of her power. That meant exposing the real estate scheme or illegal dealings fueling her mania. Edwin and I stepped up our investigation. He found out about an LLC named Lakeside Elite Ventures, registered only a few months ago in a nearby state. The listed agent was suspiciously connected to an address shared by Karen's cousin. Cross-referencing property transactions in the area, Edwin discovered Lakeside Elite Ventures had purchased 2 large parcels near the eastern tip of the lake. The next step, he theorized, would be expanding into our side. If they controlled the boat ramps, they could charge docking fees, private membership fees, maybe even build a small marina complex. This wasn't just about petty HOA rules anymore. It involved a bigger plan for commercial profit at the expense of local homeowners' rights. While uncovering these details, I also tried to be strategic about my next move. I realized Karen's aggression might backfire if the community understood how it affected them. So I created an online forum specifically for residents to share experiences with the HOA. Within days, the site lit up with complaints. People posted about minor issues that Karen had blown out of proportion or newly imposed fees for trivial matters. One resident, Janine, wrote a heartbreaking story about how she was threatened with legal action because she installed a small wheelchair ramp for her husband without Karen's architectural approval. Another resident revealed that Karen had demanded a percentage of a neighbor's short-term rental revenue because it supposedly increased the HOA's security costs. The more posts I saw, the more I realized we were dealing with a bully who believed she had absolute control. The community forum served to unite many of us. We organized an informal gathering at Lucy's house. About 15 people attended. Some had lived here for years, others for only a few months like me. We agreed we should collectively stand up against Karen's unscrupulous actions. Lucy suggested we form a subcommittee to demand transparency from the HOA board. Chris proposed we each contact the county about the suspicious property lines, and I promised to share any legal findings from Edwin regarding the questionable LLC. We parted, feeling more optimistic, but also aware that Karen would push back even harder if she sensed a revolt. Sure enough, the next day I received a thick envelope from the HOA Compliance Division. Inside was a formal letter stating I was in violation of 6 separate bylaws. They were ridiculous. One cited that my garbage bin placement was a few inches off the designated area. Another claimed my fence was not the approved color, even though it was there before I bought the house. The real kicker was the unauthorized structure notice referencing my boat dock. They stated that for each day I failed to remedy these violations, I owed $200.00. By the end of the week, I'd supposedly owe more than $1,000, with the figure climbing daily. It felt like extortion, and that's exactly what it was. I called Edwin in a panic, worried about liens and the potential for the HOA to foreclose on my home. He calmly walked me through relevant state laws. An HOA can't foreclose if their claims are legally baseless, especially if they're not in compliance with county zoning. But that wouldn't stop them from trying. He recommended I file a formal dispute with the local municipality, so I did, submitting a packet of evidence including photographs of my dock, testimonies from neighbors, plus questions about the contradictory property lines. During the waiting period for an official response, I made an alarming discovery. While walking my dog near the wooded area by the lake, I stumbled upon a newly laid foundation behind some trees. It looked like early construction work, rebar sticking out, fresh concrete, and there were no signs or permits posted. My gut told me it was connected to Karen's secret Marina project. If that construction was on land the HOA supposedly controlled, they'd need official county permit, so I snapped pictures. I also saw an unmarked white pickup truck parked nearby with a man in a neon vest rummaging through the bed of the truck. He glared at me but didn't speak. I left, unsettled but more determined to expose the shady operation. Several days later, at a coffee shop in town, I met with Lucy and Chris to share the photos. They were stunned but not entirely surprised. Lucy mentioned she'd heard machinery running at odd hours. She wondered if the HOA was funneling association fees into construction that would eventually benefit the private LLC. Chris suggested we contact a local journalist who occasionally wrote exposés on property disputes. It was a bold step, but maybe public scrutiny would force the county's hand. None of us liked stirring up the media, but what choice did we have? Karen controlled the local channels of communication, and the county was agonizingly slow. I reached out to that journalist, Megan Clark. She had a reputation for being relentless once she caught wind of a scandal. At first, I worried she'd dismiss our story as a typical neighborly spat, but as soon as I showed her the photos and explained the alleged corruption, her eyes lit up. She asked for background details, copies of the suspicious bylaws, and any documents that might confirm wrongdoing. I handed over everything I had, cautioning her that Karen could be vindictive. Megan nodded, scribbling notes, promising to keep my name confidential until she could verify the claims. She spent about 2 weeks investigating. Then one Friday morning, an article popped up on the local paper's website. Lakefront community in possible land grab controversy. HOA ties to mystery LLC. My phone started buzzing with messages from neighbors. People were both shocked and relieved that the situation was finally public. Karen, of course, went ballistic. She sent out a mass email to all residents condemning the article as fake news and threatening legal action against anyone who slandered the HOA. She reminded everyone the HOA had full authority over the lakefront. But her email also tried to downplay the new fees, claiming they were temporary and just needed to ensure proper insurance coverage. The contradictory tone revealed her desperation. The forum lit up again. Residents posted the link to the article, pointing out Karen's falsehoods. One person posted a screenshot of the county's website, showing no permit for any new structure near the lake. Another discovered property records linking Karen's cousin to Lakeside Elite Ventures. The proverbial cat was out of the bag. I'd be lying if I said I felt no fear at that point. Karen was known to harass or sue people. Sure enough, I got served with an official-looking letter from an attorney representing the HOA. It accused me of defamation, demanded I cease spreading malicious rumors. It also claimed I had entered restricted HOA grounds to take unauthorized photos, an absurd claim considering I was on what might well be public land. Edwin read the letter and smirked. It's a bluff. But that didn't mean she wouldn't try. At least I had the community's growing support. People were fed up with Karen's tyranny. Some board members privately informed me they'd never approved any so-called commercial expansion on the lake. If Karen had authorized it, she was operating beyond her official capacity. That could lead to a board vote to remove her, if enough members had the courage. Meanwhile, the county inspector's office finally got back to me with a partial conclusion. They found multiple conflicting boundary surveys over the years. Some suggested the slipway was association property, others indicated it remained public domain. The county intended to hold a hearing to settle the matter. This was both good and bad news. Good, because we'd have an official process to clarify property lines, because it might allow Karen to appear with her own consultant or lawyer and complicate the outcome. Nonetheless, I saw a glimmer of hope. If I could prove that her construction behind the trees was unauthorized, the county might crack down on her and the developer. So I prepared all my evidence, making sure each photograph was time-stamped, each dock properly labeled. Days turned into weeks, my mail filled with more threatening notices. Fines from the HOA soared, at least on paper. Karen insisted I owed thousands, but I refused to pay. Our little online forum had blossomed into a residents' coalition. We pitched in for a group attorney, a local woman named Danielle who specialized in HOA disputes. She reviewed the entire fiasco, from the possible Marina bill to the extortionate fees, concluding that the HOA leadership was in clear violation of state statutes. She drafted a cease and desist letter demanding they halt all unauthorized construction and remove the personal fines. Karen ignored it. When the county hearing date arrived, tensions were thick in the air. We gathered in a plain municipal building, a small chamber with wooden pews. On one side, Karen sat with her newly hired private attorney, a tall man with slicked back hair. On my side, Danielle was there, along with Lucy and Chris for moral support. A county clerk read the docket. Public hearing on the matter of disputed lakefront property lines involving the Maplewood Shores HOA and local resident Jonathan Parker, among others. Karen shot me an icy glare. Her lawyer insisted the property had always been under the HOA's authority, citing an obscure addendum from decades ago. Then Danielle stood up, calmly presenting recent plat maps and an old provision from the city charter that designated certain portions of the lake as public trust. The hearing official asked pointed questions. Karen's lawyer squirmed a bit. They tried to wave around some engineering survey that allegedly proved the HOA's ownership, but it lacked the official stamp from the county assessor. At that moment, I introduced the photos of the suspicious foundation. Danielle argued that if the HOA truly believed they owned that land, why hadn't they filed the necessary construction permits? Karen and her lawyer stumbled over their explanation, muttering something about a pending application. The official made a note, clearly unimpressed. By the end of the hearing, it was clear to everyone that the case was too complicated for a simple resolution. The official announced there'd be a further investigation and scheduled a second hearing a month later. Karen stormed out, ignoring me entirely. The atmosphere in the community after that hearing was electric. Most neighbors realized Karen's claims might be bogus. A few of her staunch allies stuck with her. Perhaps they were promised benefits from the new development. But the majority seemed to align with my stance. In a bold move, Lucy circulated a petition demanding a special HOA board meeting to discuss removing Karen as president. Our bylaws stated if 25% of households signed, the board had to hold an extraordinary session. Within a week, Lucy had well over that threshold. Karen tried to discount the signatures as invalid, but we'd followed protocol meticulously. The meeting took place in the largest space we had, the local church hall, because the usual clubhouse was too small for the crowd. Karen arrived with 2 bodyguards. I'd never seen anything like it. Rumor was she'd hired them from a security firm, claiming she felt threatened by a hostile mob. The irony was intense, given she was the one who terrorized residents for years. The board members, including Ruth, lined up at a long table. The tension was palpable. Lucy stood at a podium, reciting a list of concerns: financial opacity, unauthorized fees, questionable property dealings. Chris displayed images of that concealed construction project. Then Lucy read a statement from our group attorney, pointing out that Karen's actions could expose the HOA to lawsuits. People in the audience began shouting for Karen's resignation. Karen attempted damage control. She insisted everything was a misunderstanding. She tried to shame me, called me a troublemaker, accusing me of wanting to destroy our beautiful community, but the outcry was overwhelming. Finally, Ruth mustered her courage. She rose and declared a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. The place erupted. The board, though trembling, officially tallied votes. Karen lost by a wide margin. She turned beet red. Once the final count was read, she refused to stand down, claiming the petition was invalid. But the majority of board members recognized that residents were done tolerating her intimidation. The board effectively suspended her authority pending the outcome of the county's investigation. She stomped out in rage. Though we felt a sense of victory, we knew the fight wasn't over. Karen still possessed enough cunning to create chaos or fling lawsuits at us, and she did exactly that. A week later, we received an official complaint filed in civil court, listing me, Lucy, and Chris as defendants. She claimed defamation, interference with business expectations, and a host of other fancy-sounding accusations. She demanded hundreds of thousands of dollars in damages. It was breathtaking in its audacity, but at least now we had an attorney. Danielle reviewed the suit, labeling it a classic SLAP, strategic lawsuit against public participation. She filed motions to dismiss, citing anti-SLAP statutes in our state. It was a waiting game again. Nonetheless, a giant legal cloud loomed overhead. During this tense period, I found solace fishing early in the morning. With the ramp signage no longer enforced, thanks to Karen's downfall, I could finally float my boat out onto the calm water. However, my mind never fully relaxed. I worried about the money I'd need for legal fees if her lawsuit dragged on. Then, a surprising development occurred. The local journalist Megan published a follow-up piece. In it, she revealed that Lakeside Elite Ventures had been flagged for possible illegal funding streams. She noted an unnamed source within the developer's circle indicated bribes or kickbacks might be involved. The article named Karen's cousin as an officer of the LLC. It essentially exposed that their alleged plan wasn't just an improper land grab. It could be a criminally fraudulent scheme to launder money or defraud the county. That tidbit changed the game. Because if those allegations prove true, Karen might be facing far worse than an HOA recall. She could face criminal charges. People in the community reacted with a mix of shock and triumph. The developer's involvement was bigger than we expected. The county also seemed embarrassed that it had failed to identify such suspicious activity earlier. Officials began accelerating their investigation. Meanwhile, Karen's lawsuit against me lost considerable credibility. At the preliminary hearing, her lawyer tried to paint me as a troublemaker, but Danielle countered with a trove of evidence pointing directly to Karen's potential wrongdoing. The judge was skeptical of Karen's claims, especially after reading the investigative article. He declined to dismiss our anti-SLEP motion and indicated we had a strong case. That meant Karen's lawsuit could end up being thrown out, with her liable for our legal costs. Within a few more weeks, county investigators delivered a bombshell. The unpermitted Marina construction site was officially shut down. They discovered not only was there no permit, but the land itself was partly in a protected wetland buffer zone. Anyone building there would need extensive environmental clearances. This was an enormous violation, punishable by hefty fines and possibly criminal charges for willful destruction of a wetland. Karen, however, was nowhere to be seen. Rumor had it she was staying at a relative's place in another state, probably hoping to dodge the fallout. Her presence in the community dwindled. Some people whispered that she'd tried to quietly sell her home. But with her reputation in tatters, potential buyers were wary. I remained cautious, wanting to see the resolution through. The final county hearing on the property lines took place about a month later. This time, Karen didn't attend, leaving her lawyer to face the music alone. Our side laid out all the documented evidence of how that boat ramp had historically been accessible to the public, how my deed included shoreline usage, and how the HOA had never legally acquired that patch of land. The county official ruled that the lakefront access indeed remained public, thereby invalidating the HOA's ban and any associated fines. The official also declared that any expansions or developments on that land required new approvals, none of which Karen had pursued lawfully. With that ruling in hand, the residents called one more special HOA meeting to finalize the leadership changes. About half the board had already resigned out of shame or fear. The other half seemed eager to restore normalcy. A new election was organized and Lucy was nominated as president. She hesitated, unsure she wanted that responsibility, but the community insisted. They needed someone who genuinely cared about open communication and fairness. Lucy agreed, on the condition that the entire neighborhood work together to overhaul the bylaws, ensuring no single individual could wield so much unchecked power again. The next day, a local deputy showed up at Karen's house with a stack of papers. The scuttlebutt was that the developer's fiasco had triggered not just civil suits but also potential fraud charges. With the limited evidence available, it was unclear if Karen would face direct criminal liability, but her cousin, listed as an LLC officer, definitely would. As for Karen's lawsuit against us, the judge eventually dismissed it, awarding attorney fees in our favor. The court recognized it as a retaliatory slap. That moment was sweet vindication. We stood on the courthouse steps grinning from ear to ear as Danielle explained how Karen, if she were still around, might be forced to cover a significant portion of our legal bills. That money would be used to set up a defense fund for any future HOA abuse, effectively preventing another tyrant from rising unchecked. Despite the relief, the ordeal left me emotionally drained. I realized how easy it was for manipulative people in positions of nominal power to trample the rights of ordinary citizens. But it also demonstrated how unity, coupled with persistence, can dismantle corruption. I strolled back to my lakefront property, inhaling the crisp twilight air, marveling at the subtle silver glow of moonlight on the water. My boat rocked gently against the dock. For the first time in months, I wasn't anxious about receiving yet another threatening letter or being confronted by an angry neighbor. Instead, I felt peace, and I vowed never to let anyone bully me out of what was rightfully mine, or bully my neighbors. A few weeks after the resolution, Lucy officially took over as HOA president. She and the remaining board members invited Danielle to help rewrite some of the more outdated and abusive clauses in the bylaws. They also decided to hold monthly community roundtables where any homeowner could raise questions or concerns. This inclusive approach signaled a transformative era for the neighborhood. One Sunday, Lucy organized a potluck by the lake. She encouraged everyone to come, meet the new board, and enjoy an afternoon free from intimidation. I brought homemade lemonade. A crowd of people showed up with casseroles, desserts, and a newfound sense of optimism. There was laughter, conversations about fishing and kayaking. The boat ramp stood wide open, no private sign in sight. Children splashed near the shore, squealing with delight at the gentle waves. Preacher. It felt like the real meaning of community had finally taken root. During that gathering, Chris pulled me aside. "So, how's it feel knowing you triggered all these changes?" he asked with a grin. I shrugged, admitting it felt good, but also heavy. There was a price to pay for confrontation, stress, conflict, money. But seeing everyone relax around the lake, free from oppressive fees or looming threats, made it worthwhile. Chris joked that maybe one day we'd rename the boat ramp in my honor. I laughed and politely declined. I didn't need that kind of attention. All I'd wanted was to fish in peace and keep a piece of my late father's legacy. A small, weathered dock that reminded me of simpler times. Meanwhile, neighbors occasionally brought me tips on what Karen might be doing next. Some said she'd lawyered up for her own defense. Others believed she'd fled out of state to avoid possible prosecution. If I was being honest, I felt a bit of pity for her. She was so obsessed with making illegal money, so certain she could manipulate us. In the end, she lost the only real currency that matters. Even if she'd made a fortune, it would have been tainted by the heartbreak she inflicted on her neighbors. I didn't wish her well, but I didn't wish her ill either. I just wanted the nightmare to end. With my newly regained access, I spent more time on the water. Early mornings, I'd glide out just as the sunrise painted the sky in gentle pink and orange. I'd drop anchor near a row of cypress trees, listening to the soft hum of wildlife. Sometimes Chris joined me. We'd swap jokes about the madness we'd endured, reveling in the calm. Other times I went alone, letting the gentle rocking lull me into a sense of equilibrium. It was a reminder of how close we'd come to losing this simple freedom. How easily greed could have walled off public nature in pursuit of dollars. As the summer progressed, the final pieces of the puzzle slid into place. The second county hearing concluded that the majority of shoreline near the slipway was indeed public domain, reinforcing that the HOA had overstepped its bounds. Lucy's board rescinded all the illegally imposed fees, including that monstrous monthly charge. They dismantled the fence Karen had authorized around the ramp, an ugly chain-link barrier she'd put up without any official clearance. The board also set up a transparent financial process. Residents could see exactly where their dues went, preventing the sort of clandestine expenses Karen had listed as consultant fees. I remember the day they tore down that fence. A small crowd gathered, clapping as the chain link came tumbling down. Cameras flashed. Local news even showed up to do a piece titled, "Neighborhood Restores Lake Access After Corruption Scandal." For many in the area, it felt like a new beginning. Children rode bikes along the newly opened paths. Older couples strolled hand in hand, soaking up the lakeside views. People waved from their yards, openly relieved the fear had lifted. During that same period, I discovered an envelope in my mailbox, one without a return address. Inside was a single typed sheet. "Stop meddling or it'll get worse," it read. No signature. No clue who sent it. Maybe it was a desperate friend of Karen's or a random troublemaker. I briefly felt my heart pound. But then I recalled everything we'd accomplished so far. I had the whole community on my side, plus a fearless attorney, plus local journalists who would happily shine light on any further threats. I calmly handed it over to Danielle, who said we'd keep it on file if anything ever developed. She doubted they'd try anything overt now that Karen's influence had crumbled, and she was right. Nothing else came of it. The intimidation had lost its sting. Over time, the county's investigation into Karen's cousin and that questionable LLC progressed. I heard rumors that the developer faced heavy fines for the wetland violation and that a formal indictment loomed. No one could confirm if Karen herself would be included in that action. Regardless, everyone in Maplewood Shores took it as a lesson in vigilance. We couldn't assume the HOA had our best interest at heart if it was led by the wrong person. We learned the importance of reading our bylaws carefully, attending meetings, questioning suspicious changes, and pushing back if something smelled rotten. Toward the end of the summer, Lucy's board proposed a community improvement day. Volunteers would help clean up debris from the unauthorized foundation site, replant some native grasses, and remove remnants of Karen's half-started marina. I volunteered, of course. Under the bright sunshine, a handful of us dug up battered cement chunks and hammered away rusted rebar. Danielle showed up wearing work gloves and a grin, joking that we were cleaning away the last of Karen's toxic legacy. We chuckled, even though we realized how close we came to a different outcome. If no one had resisted, that site would have grown into a private marina, locked behind gates. The entire lakeside might have become a luxury commodity, forcing folks to pay outrageous fees just to stand on the shore. Some greed-driven dream that had no place in a friendly neighborhood. By early autumn, the hillside trees began shifting to gold and crimson. The water took on a deeper hue, reflecting the changing sky. I spent many afternoons kayaking, savoring the quiet. Occasionally, I'd run into neighbors who'd wave from their own canoes or paddle boards. The air felt lighter, as if the tension had evaporated. We had transformed from a fearful collective into a real community again, watching each other's backs. One evening, Lucy and Chris dropped by my place. We grilled burgers, enjoying the mild weather. After we'd eaten, we sat around a small fire pit in my backyard, the lake shimmering behind us. Lucy reflected on how none of us had asked for this fight. We all just wanted to live our lives, she mused. Who knew we'd end up challenging a corrupt HOA president? Chris added, "Sometimes you don't choose the battle, it chooses you." We laughed, raising our drinks in a toast to the unplanned camaraderie. It felt good to share that moment of triumph, free from the weight of intimidation. We didn't see Karen again after her meltdown in that big meeting. Some said she was lying low with family in another state nursing her wounds. Others speculated she was fighting her own legal battles behind the scenes. I suppose part of me remained curious if she regretted any of it, whether she realized that in chasing ill-gotten money she'd lost her entire foothold in this neighborhood. But in the end, it didn't matter much. The people here had recognized their collective power. No one wanted her drama back. Even the board members who once feared her had found their voices, thanks to Lucy's open leadership style. After the dust settled, life began to resemble what I'd originally envisioned when I moved here. A peaceful lakeside existence, neighbors who greeted each other warmly, weekends with barbecues and potlucks, the gentle lull of water lapping against the shore. There was something poetic about it, how one determined neighbor could spark a movement that toppled a tyrant. It wasn't my intention to become that catalyst, yet circumstances left me no choice. I needed to protect my rights, and in doing so, I helped restore fairness for everyone. Every now and then, when the sun sets over the water, I stand on my dock and consider how fragile community trust is. It can be eroded in an instant by one person's ambition, or rebuilt when people unite in defense of what's just. I think about how I almost gave up at times, those late nights worrying about legal fees, the strain on my mental health. But I didn't, and I'm proud of that. My father always taught me that if you believe in something and it's within the realm of moral and legal right, you stand your ground. Maybe that's the best inheritance I received from him. A legacy more meaningful than any piece of land. Weeks turned into months. The new HOA board stabilized. They tossed out old, arbitrary rules that served no purpose besides giving power-hungry officials the means to oppress. They started monthly financial disclosures so we all could see where our dues went. The atmosphere improved drastically. We saw fewer petty conflicts or formal complaints. Residents shared in the relief of no longer living under constant threat. Some even started talking about hosting a neighborhood festival, a small carnival by the lake to celebrate newfound unity. Lucy favored that idea. She said it would be a testament to the community's spirit of resilience. In the winter, the lake froze at the edges, and I'd occasionally spot kids testing the ice near the shore, parents close by. I joked with Chris that this was the calm after the storm. As the hush of the cold season settled, no one missed Karen's drama. Instead, we prepared for upcoming spring events, perhaps a reforestation project or a lakeside cleanup to keep the environment healthy. I found myself smiling at how the community had grown closer, ironically thanks to a crisis that forced us to band together. When spring finally arrived, so did an official notice from the county. They confirmed the final status of the disputed land, concluding it fell under the public trust domain. There would be no more confusion over who owned the slipway or the water's edge in question. In addition, they levied fines and mandated restoration for the half-built Marina site. Lucy posted an announcement on the community board praising everyone's efforts and promising a transparent approach going forward. I celebrated that sunny spring afternoon by launching my boat again, drifting leisurely, inhaling the fresh scent of budding trees. Looking back at my dock from the middle of the water, I felt a wave of gratitude. There was no orange sign telling me to keep out, no anxious knot in my stomach about lawsuits or fines. Just freedom, just a sense of rightful belonging. Months later, I heard from Megan, the journalist, one last time. She let me know that her reporting on Karen's scheme earned her recognition from a regional press association. She thanked me for being courageous enough to hand over documents and stand up publicly. I told her the real heroes were my neighbors who refused to be bullied. She chuckled, saying we were a model for how average citizens could resist corruption. It was a nice way to wrap up this saga, knowing our trials served a purpose beyond our little corner of the world. Today, I still watch that same sunset shimmering across the water. Sometimes I'm alone. Sometimes I'm with good friends, sharing stories and laughter. The association's new leadership continues to function with integrity, making me proud to call this place home. And though the memory of Karen's intimidation once cast a shadow over the lake, that shadow has finally receded. In its wake stands a more unified, resilient community. One that realized no sum of illegal money was worth sacrificing our shared values. I see that truth reflected in every ripple along the shore. I feel it in every greeting from neighbors who once suffered in silence. None of us know where Karen ended up, or if she found a new town to manipulate. All we can do is remain vigilant. We've already proven that tyranny can be toppled if we stand shoulder to shoulder. My boat remains tied to its rightful dock, a silent testament to perseverance. And whenever I step aboard, the soft sound of the water reminds me that peace, like justice, must sometimes be fought for, but once earned, it's all the sweeter.